Hi, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to look at a German game by the name of Ganz Schön clever, which translates to something like pretty clever or very clever. And this is a roll and write dice game that goes from 1 to 4 players. The box says ages 8 and up, and it plays in about 30 minutes. The designer is Wolfgang Warsch, and it's put out by Schmidt-Spiel. So I think it's only available in Europe. You'll probably have to import it. It is... in my version, this German version, no English rules came with it, but I did post online on BoardGameGeek a English translation. I believe there might be an English translation coming out down the line, however, but there are no language-dependent components besides a rule book in the box. Let me take a moment to show you how this game works, and then I'll come back and let you know what I think about it. So in Ganz Schön clever, each player is going to get a player sheet. They'll actually get one from this tablet. I just made larger laminated ones that I use. I find that these are easier to read, and also they can be reused, which is good. But the game comes with plenty of these. On the back, I'll note that they have a score pad. I kind of wish that they had just made these double-sided, but you know, you can't have it all. In any case, each player is going to get one of those. They'll get a writing utensil. The game comes with some small pens if you're going to use the tablets. I use dry erase markers. And then each player, or the starting player for the first round is going to get these 6 dice. And you should note that these 6 dice, they're just standard 6-sided dice in 6 different colors. The white one is essentially a wild. The other 5 dice here are going to correspond to these 5 sections on the scoring sheet. So there's a yellow, blue, green, orange, purple, and there's a die for each of those. So depending on the number of players, you're going to be playing a variable number of rounds, and those are going to be marked at the top. So with a 4-player game, you're just going to play 4 rounds, but you can see here with 3 players, you play 5 rounds. With 1 or 2 players, you're going to play 6 rounds. And at the start of each of those rounds, you're going to get the bonus that's shown underneath the round marker. And each player will get that bonus. So at the start of the game, each player is going to get one of these re-rolls, which is marked right there. And to indicate that you have that, what you do is, you can see here there's a space for the re-roll action, the space for the extra die action. They're getting a re-roll, so they just fill in the circle there like that. Then later, when they're going to use it, all they have to do to indicate that they use it is, cross that out. So at the start of the game, each player will get a re-roll. I'll explain what those do in a moment. But the way the game term works is players are going to, each round, take turns being the active player. And as the active player, you're going to be able to take up to 3 dice, put them in these 3 slots, and for each die, mark off 1 space on your board here. Marking off the spaces here, which each of these sections has different requirements, is going to be how you're going to trigger scorings and extra actions. And then from the dice, essentially, that weren't picked by the active player, all other players are going to be able to pick one of those dice. So let me just show you how that works. So if I was the first player, I would roll my dice, and then you can see I have these dice to pick from. So the big consideration when you're picking a die, so you can see here I have a purple one. Maybe I would want to take that. That would probably be a good option. So if I take that purple one, that's terrific. I take the 1, I put it in that space just to indicate that I took it, and then I'm able to fill in a slot on my purple section. So I would be able to put in a 1 down here. So then I would be able to re-roll these dice, pick again. So that would be, how a turn might work. But let's say instead of wanting that 1, maybe I wanted this green 3. Then if I took this 3, I would, fill in a number on the green section. But the catch is, any numbers that are lower than the number that you took, so this 1 and 2, would get put out onto that platter. So other players it would give more choices to the other players at the end of the round, plus it would mean when I re-roll now, I'd have fewer dice to re-roll. So taking a higher number on an early roll does mean that you're going to be sacrificing some dice. So let me just take a moment and I'll explain how these various sections score. So I just took that purple 1, and the reason why I did that was because you could see here that the purple section, you just are going to fill in numbers from left to right, and each number that you put there in this row has to be greater than the number that it was previously placed there. So putting 1 there is good because I could put anything from 2 to 6 there, and then so on. So if, next turn I put a 4 there, then I would only be able to put a 5 or 6 in this space. As soon as you put a 6 in a space, though, the next number could be anything. So anything could follow a 6. So, you're never going to, max out this row. You can always place a 6 there, and then the next number could be anything. You'll note that there are these little markers along the bottom here, and these are essentially bonuses that you're going to get as soon as you fill in those specific spaces, and those are going to trigger right away, except for this fox, which is an endgame thing. I'll explain that at the end. But if I placed my 3rd number here, I would immediately get access to another one of these reroll actions, which I could spend on a future turn. If I placed a number here, or a number in this 4th space, I would immediately get to cross off something in the blue section up here. So that's how those work, and those are going to be scattered among all of the sections. So basically purple is going to be, each number has to be successively greater. 6 reset the cycle. At the end of the game, your total for the purple section is going to be the total of all the numbers that you have there. So this is right now just 1 point, but as I fill this up, I'll be scoring more and more points. The orange section works similarly in that each number that you have there is going to be tallied up at the end, although you could see that maybe it's hard to see on the camera here, but some of the spaces here have ×2. So if you ever fill in that number here, you get to, so let's say I put a 5, I use a 5 to fill in that, I get to double that number, and I get to write 10 there. So really hitting those markers here, and at the end there's actually a ×3, is how you're going to score for the orange. So you could put anything in there, but you're going to get points doubled at certain points along the way there. So pretty simple. The green ones, you can see here, greater than or equal to 1, greater than or equal to 2, and so on. And then there's above them these points. So basically this one here I could put in any number. Here I have to put in a 2 or higher, 3 or higher, and so on. And then it resets along at about here. And at the end of the game, all the points that you're getting, it's not going to be the total of the numbers that you've put in there. It'll simply be, let's say I filled up to here, I would get 28 points. You just look at that track. So that one works differently. So these are all very similar, but they have each their little unique twists. Then this section here, the yellow section, you can see there's essentially 1s through 6s up here. And whenever you take a yellow die, you get to cross out one of that value. So for example, if I took a yellow 5, I could cross out either this space here or this space here. So I could cross out either 5 space. And the goal here is to complete either rows or columns. For completing columns, at the end of the game, you're going to get points. So if I cross out this 1, 2, and 3, and this X is already starting out crossed off, at the end of the game, I'll get 10 points. And you can score multiple of those. And then for completing rows, you're going to get these bonuses. And there's also this diagonal row, which will give you an extra die selection. And then finally, the last one here is the blue section, and I'll hold that there. And again, you can see it works similar to the green section, where the number of numbers that you have crossed out at the end of the game is going to determine the number of points. So if I crossed out 5 of these at the end of the game, I'll get 11 points. And the way that this works, you can see it shows blue and white die. What you do, so let's say I rolled among my dice a 3 on the white die and a 2 on the blue die. I add those up, so I would get a 5, and I'd be able to cross out specifically the number 5 in this grid. And similar to the yellow section, you could see for completing rows and columns, you'll also get bonuses as well. So the way that the white die works is if you take the white die, you could choose to use it as any color die. So if you would take the white die, it was a 3, you could cross out anything in the in the yellow section here. You could put a 3 in the next available slot in any of these sections, or you could add it to whatever the face value is, or the face-up value is of the blue die, to cross out a section in here. So the blue and white die are always going to be tied together, and that's even if it's been set aside because you didn't choose it, or even if it's sitting on here because you chose it in a previous round. So if, like in round 2, I take this, if later I choose the white die and I want to pair it with the blue, I will still add it to whatever the blue is still showing face up. So it's important that as you're placing your dice, or placing your dice onto this platter, you're not going to be rotating those, because those dice pairs are always going to be cumulative. All right, so let me just resume showing you what the round looks like. So now that I've kind of explained how the scoring works. So basically there, I have, taken the 1, a purple, so since I took a 1, I could re-roll everything. Now I roll here, so I have a 2, so on the blue, but I probably don't want to cross out my 7, so a lot of the game is going to be about trying to figure out what, leaving the high probability rolls for later in the game as your choices begin to narrow. So maybe I would just take the orange 3, I put that here, I get to fill in a 3 there, and then since I took the orange 3, the 2 is going to go here, I get to re-roll these dice, so now I have either a 2, or a 4, so I could put, for example, the 2 here, because it's greater than or equal to 1, and then that would mean that these dice become available for the other players. So the other players then will be able to choose from these 3 dice that I did not select, or that I set aside, and then it would be the end of my turn as the active player. So 2 other things I need to explain, I guess, are these special powers. So, like I said, you're going to get these over the course of the game in 2 ways. At the start of the round, you'll get some, and then you'll also get them for unlocking certain milestones along these paths. So, the reroll is, if you're the active player, you could cross one of those out to just reroll all the dice. So that could be very handy if you're looking for a specific value. And then the +1, so at the end of the round, after I've taken all of my dice, if I had a +1, I could basically spend +1s to take any of the dice again. So, like, even if it was one that was on the active player sheet. So if I took this, I could take, for example, another purple 1, which I wouldn't be able to use here, but you could use any of them from here or from here. But you could only use a 1 +1 per die. You could use as many +1s that you want at the end of any active player's turn. So that just allows you to get more things crossed off. So those are very useful. So after every other player has basically picked one of these dices to use, everybody's used their +1s if they chose to use that, then the next player who you're playing with is going to become the active player. And they'll do the same thing, roll the dice, pick 3 of them, and then all inactive players will get to pick a die from up here to use. And that once every player has had a turn at the active player, you're going to move on to round 2. And then, the same thing will happen. Each player gets to be active player. And then, you just keep going like that until you're at the end of round 4. And then you'll just do your final scoring. So like I said, the score sheet is on the back of here. And so it's really quite simple. And you can see, you'll just fill in the total for each section that you have. And then the foxes, the way that those work, those are going to be basically bonus points. So you could see, again, on the score sheet, that, like, for example, if you fill in this row, you earn a fox. If you fill in that row, you earn a fox. If you get all the way to one of these sections, you get a fox. So you could get a lot of these foxes, but the way that these are going to score you is each fox that you have is going to be worth the value of your lowest section. So, for example, if I only filled in this 1 green the whole game, each fox will only be worth 1 point. So that's going to encourage, so even though the points get high at the end of each section, which is pretty universal along here, you get the ×3 multiplier and so on. So even though the points are going to go up, if you're going to be earning the foxes, which is, a good chance, which might be what puts you over at the end of the game as far as points go, you're going to have to try to balance out your points across all the sections, because only your lowest section will be informing what the foxes score. So in any case, like I said, you'll tally up each section, you'll get your fox bonus, the player with the most points is going to win. Okay, so that is Ganz Schön Clever, and I guess I'll preface this by saying that there are a lot of these roll and write games on the market. They seem to be increasing in popularity lately, and this is maybe one of the better ones from my point of view. The caveat with that, however, is that it is also one of the longer ones. The box says 30 minutes that it takes to play, which is definitely on the longer side for this genre of games. I think that for some players, playing 30 minutes, a game where you're just essentially at the mercy of dice luck to a large degree, is going to be a turnoff. But if you're just in a beer and pretzel sort of situation with people where you're largely just socializing, I think that the game is perfect, right? It's a good fit for a situation like that. And there is something to be said for having a roll and write game that has more complex decisions than something like, for example, Quicks, which is a great game, and it could play in about 15 minutes or so, but it has fewer choices to make. This definitely gives you choices, especially as the active player, which each player is going to be doing several times over the course of the game. You'll really want to take a look at every single die choice that you have when you're making your decisions. If you want to take a higher die, you'll think, oh, but what about the dice I'm setting aside? I'm not going to have access to those, and so on. So there's definitely more decision making here, which to me is a benefit, but at the same time it does push up the amount of time that's going to take to play the game. The good thing is that with more players, the number of rounds shortens, so it's not substantially longer with 4 players than it would be with 3 players or with 2 players. It seems to even out. The other, I guess, caveat is a lot of people play these roll and write games as filler games. They just want to play them while they're waiting for another group to finish their game or what have you. And this, as you can see from the score sheet and probably from the length of my rules explanation, it takes a few minutes to really explain how each of these sections scores, how the special powers work, how the dice drafting works, and so on. So for a filler game, it's not only going to take you about 30 minutes to play, but it's also going to take you a few more minutes than you might expect to go through the rules. It's by no means a super complicated game, but the first time that you're going to sit down to play it, you might need to spend a few minutes familiarizing people with it, which again, for a filler game is usually not a selling point. But I think that this makes up for it in terms of the added complexity, the added decision space that it adds. So, I guess I would say in all, this is a really clever game, no pun intended. It's certainly one that feels more like a gamer version of a roll and write game, something like the maybe like the La Granja or St. Malo, those dice games that give you a little bit more to chew on. It's closer to those in spirit because of the number of manipulations that you have. Certainly, like using these special powers, trying to aim for certain bonuses along these tracks. Those are going to be big, like, strategic decisions, which a lot of these dice games just don't have those sort of strategic planning aspects to them. This really does. So I would say it's closer to the St. Malos or the La Granja dice games than something like a Yahtzee. Right, it's a little bit more convoluted, which isn't to say that's unapproachable in any ways. I think anybody would be able to understand this. It's just that there's a lot going on here, and a player who's going to be able to plan better is probably going to win. It's not just a matter of simple luck. So, so largely, I would say this is a very strong recommendation. This is a terrific game. I've really enjoyed my plays of it so far. Like I said, to the extent that I've laminated it, although I tend to do that with all of my dice games, and I look forward to playing it a lot more in the future. There is, I'll just say, just one scoring sheet. It's not like that. Some of these score pads have variants in them, but every sheet's the same every game, which keeps things even, I suppose. I do sort of wish that there might have been some variety in there, some different designs, but it does seem well balanced for what it is, as it is. But that's a very minor complaint. This is a game that I'll be coming back to over time, I'm sure, and it's one that I think does give you, even on this static score sheet, a lot of potential routes to victory. So those are my thoughts on this very good dice game, Ganz Schön Clever.